Although I sold a couple of stories as a college student, my career as a professional fiction writer actually began just after my graduation. I had written a column, King's Garbage Truck it was called, the editor-in-chief's name for it, not mine, in the college paper for 2 or 3 years, and I stopped into the offices to pick up some of my junk 2 or 3 days after commencement. The place was totally empty, the first time I'd ever seen it that way. For a week or so, I'd had a story idea knocking around in my head, something about giant rats living and breeding under a New England textile mill. It wasn't a bit like the sensitive literary fiction I'd been doing in the creative writing seminars I had taken, not much like the slap-happy, sarcastic columns I'd written for the Garbage Truck, but that big, empty office and all those empty typewriters suggested a liberation and an openness I'd only guessed at during my last couple of semesters. They suggested I could do what I wanted. Wasn't school out? I spent that day knocking out a story called Graveyard Shift. I remember being very happy and very absorbed, having the time of my life, in fact. The story was gruesome, fast, and fun. It later became a film which was gruesome and fast, but unfortunately not much fun. I sent it out to Cavalier magazine pretty much as it was. I might have put it through one fast rewrite, although I don't remember doing so. My writer's market said Cavalier would read unagented horror and science fiction stories, and that was good enough for me. It turned out to be good enough for Nye Wilden, the fiction editor at Cavalier, too. He bought it for $200, which seemed an enormous amount of money to a young man who had spent most of his college years in 2 pairs of blue jeans and had on more than one occasion supped on cheery casserole, a dish I invented. It consisted of Cheerios and peanut butter fried in Wesson oil. Ever had any? No? Good for you. By the time the check for Graveyard Shift arrived, I was engaged to be married. My intended, Tabitha Spruce of Old Town, Maine, enjoyed my stories a good deal, as I enjoyed her work, mostly poetry at that time. I met her while we were working together at the Raymond Fogler Library at the University of Maine, but really got to know her in a series of poetry seminars and workshops. She read a story of mine called I Am the Doorway in the early fall of 1970, and said it was one of the best science fiction stories she'd ever read. I was flattered out of my socks, not to mention the rest of my apparel. That story also sold to Cavalier, and by the time it was published, we were married. By 1973, we had a couple of kids. All that flattering each other out of our socks had inevitable consequences, and my short story sales to the men's magazines had become crucial to our financial survival. I began our partnership as a laundry worker and progressed to teaching high school English. Neither was quite enough for a family of 4, but with the extra $1,200 or so from short story sales, we were able to get by. It got to the point where, when one of the kids got an ear infection and we needed to buy antibiotics, Tabby would say, half joking and half not, "Hurry up, Steve, think of a monster." In the late fall or early winter of 1972, I had an idea for a short story about a girl with telekinetic, or psychokinetic if you prefer, powers. The idea had actually been kicking around in my head since high school when I read a Life magazine article about a case of poltergeist activity in a suburban home. Poltergeists are frisky or teasing spirits, ghosts if you want to call a spook a spook. The activity in this house seemed, on closer examination, to have nothing to do with ghosts. There was a troubled teenage girl in the family. When she was home, objects, particularly religious objects, flew through the air. When she was away, things stayed where they belonged. The article hazarded the theory that much of the activity ascribed to ghosts is actually caused by kids, and that girls on the brink of puberty seem especially apt to tap into this wild talent. The idea seemed to be that there was a great force within them, accessible only at this time of life. I thought it would make a good story, maybe worth as much as $500, and started to write it, working in the laundry room of our little trailer. In those days, I couldn't get away from washing machines, it seemed, and typing the first draft single-spaced and with extra narrow margins, as I always did. Paper cost money, and we had none to waste on extra sheets for first drafts. Before I had completed 2 pages, ghosts of my own began to intrude, the ghosts of 2 girls, both dead, who eventually combined to become Carrie White. I will not call either by her true name here. They were unfortunates in life and do not deserve to be chewed over, even in such a humble introduction as this, in death. I will call one of them Tina White and the other Sandra Irving. Tina went to Durham Elementary School with me. This was a bucolic, 4-room country school with perhaps 60 pupils in all. Tina was pudgy and quiet, so back road you could cry. There is a goat in every class, the kid who is always left without a chair in musical chairs, the one who always winds up wearing the kick me hard sign, the one who stands at the end of the pecking order. This was Tina. Not because she was stupid, she wasn't, and not because her family was peculiar, it was, but because she wore the same clothes to school every day. I can still see that outfit. I don't even need to close my eyes. There was the red hairband over the black and really quite beautiful hair. There was the white sleeveless blouse, worn both summer and winter, clinging ever more tightly to the growing and quite heavy bosom, and there was the black skirt, falling gracelessly to the lower part of the shin. After Christmas one year, Tina came in wearing an entirely new outfit. I can't remember that one, only how happy she was to be wearing it. I think she might have even been wearing nylons. And I can clearly remember how her hopeful vivacity changed, first into surprise, then into anger, and finally into dull acceptance, as the teasing and the insults and the sarcastic comments rained down on her. Instead of abating, the kids' rejection of Tina became even fiercer. I did not take part in this behavior, which can only be termed as hazing, but I did not speak against it. Hell, I was only 14 years old. It's hard to stand up when you're 14. Sandra Irving lived about 1.5 miles from the little house where I grew up. There was no father in the picture, only her mother and a large German shepherd with the absurd name of Cheddar Cheese. Mrs. Irving hired me one day to help her move some furniture. I might have been 16 or so by then, and I was struck by the crucifix hanging in the living room over the Irving couch. If such a gigantic icon had fallen while the two of them were watching TV, the person it fell on would almost certainly have been killed. I had known that the Irvings were religious in some queer and fervent way that excluded our run-of-the-mill Methodist church, but until I saw that hideous, dominating Christo, the impaled figure on the cross running blood and freshets from hands and feet inside, eyes upturned in a grisly combination of agony and compassion, I never fully understood how religious or how strange. That religion was part of what kept kids away from Sandy. The smell of her, not dirt, but some strange powdery scent like sweet and cloying library dust, was also part of it. The fact that she suffered from epileptic seizures and wore strangely modest, old-fashioned clothes also played their parts. But, as with Tina, there was something else as well, something that broadcast, "Strange, not like us, keep away," on a wavelength only other kids can pick up. It is like a pirate radio station of the heart. I can no longer pick up on that wavelength, but I can remember it very well, as I can remember Tina's black skirt and relentlessly yellowing white sleeveless blouse. Neither girl, fortunately or unfortunately, had Carrie White's wild talent. Neither made it through high school, nor saw the age of 30. Tina committed suicide, hanging herself in her cellar. Sandy died during an epileptic seizure in the small apartment she had taken in the town where we had all gone to high school. These were the ghosts which kept trying to come between me and what I was writing, kept insisting that I combine them somehow into a story that would tell what could have happened if there really was such a thing as telekinetic energy, and for all I know, there may be. What could have happened if the world was as fair to young girls as it is hard? In short, they wanted me to write a novel. I was frightened, both of the world of girls I would have to inhabit — it was a world I knew almost nothing about — and of the level of cruelty I would have to describe. I was also frightened to revisit what I'd not had the wit or moral courage to stop. And there was a more prosaic side as well. Tabby and I needed some quick money for groceries and rent, not a novel that might or might not sell to a publisher. I threw the half-completed first pages of the story into the wastebasket and went into the living room to watch TV. Tabby asked me what I'd been working on. I told her a short story, but it had gone bust and I'd thrown it away. Perhaps she saw something in my face. I don't know for sure. All I know is that she went into my little writing room, took the pages out of the wastebasket, shook off the cigarette ashes, smoothed them out, read them, and suggested I go on. I did, mostly to please her. The result turned out to be the short novel which follows, dated now, but still with a surprising power to hurt and horrify. It was published by Doubleday in 1974 and has remained in print ever since. Sometimes, quite often in fact, I wish that Tina and Sandy were alive to read it, or their daughters.